Yeah, so Snyder talked a little bit about my background. I'll contextualize it with like 30 seconds more. So I'm originally from Medellin, Colombia. And my parents made the crazy decision to move to the US when I was 4 years old. So grew up in Texas, went to college in Texas, Texas A&M University, studied computer science, and just a little over 2.5 years ago, graduated and came out here to the Bay, and I'm now living here in San Francisco. I I started full time as an engineer at Meta, or Facebook, as some of you know it, and only lasted 9.5 months until I decided to take the quantum leap and burn my boats and go all in on the founder life. So it's been super fun, super hard, but learning more than ever. And now, not only do I get to be selfish with everything I'm learning, but now I'm working on something that will transform the way that people learn as well, and creating super learners. So cool. That's a little overview. So the topic for today is the future of learning and how AI will transform the future of learning. So very, very, very fun, very interesting topic. And yeah, I'm excited to see what you guys think of it. So I'll share a presentation here. We can dive in. So the future of learning, and of course the background images here were generated by AI, because why not? So as we all know, like the way AI, generative AI has been going on for a couple of years now, but things really took off with the meteoric rise of ChatGPT. 1 million users in 5 days, 100 million users in like a month, and now I think it's like at over 200 million users. It's just gone completely ballistic. And why? Because almost out of nowhere, the advanced capabilities that we have at our disposal today are unprecedented. And so now it's a question of what can you do with the superpowers that AI offers today. One thing I like to create an analogy to here is whenever there's these sort of new technologies like generative AI, and by the way, ChatGPT and these sort of things are considered generative AI. It's a subset of AI in general. But the way I like to think about this is I see every technology like AI or generative AI as a tool in my tool belt, right? And the core question here is that if generative AI was a tool in your tool belt, what new things are you able to build that you could not build before, and that can solve existing problems in new ways? And this is how I look at it, right? Like AI is a tool in my tool belt. Virtual reality is also a tool in my tool belt. So is crypto and NFTs, and all of these technologies are different tools that I have in my tool belt. And now the question is, with these new tools and the materials that I have in front of me, what could I build? What buildings or what infrastructure am I able to construct that I was not able to before? And so I like to compare and contrast the tools I have in my tool belt with the problems that exist in order to determine what new things I'm capable of solving. So this is sort of the foundation on thinking. And if you see, of course, with generative AI, there's been a whole new ocean of opportunity that has opened up. And of course, the caveat here is that a lot of people will build a lot of things that really won't solve a real problem, and therefore it's just kind of cool, but it's not actually valuable. So the generative AI companies that are actually going to survive and not suffer from the retention that problems that most of them suffer from will depend really on how well they actually do at solving problems that are real and exist for a grand majority of people. So that's the core focus and thinking here. And one little fun question here, I'm curious if any of you already have thoughts, but this is the question I'll try to answer for this talk. All right, how will AI transform the way that we learn? Just curious if anyone wants to take a stab at it. Anyone has any thoughts or ideas on how AI might be able to influence the way that we learn today? Anyone have any thoughts they might want to share here?
Well, I mean, if it's really true that you're just looking at coding, for example, I mean, people who say, well, gee, I need to write something in Python and don't even about Python, and in 20 minutes they've written some Python code. I talked to somebody the other day who'd written 80 fairly increasingly sophisticated Python scripts and only found a mistake in one of them. So it seems to me that this may fundamentally change some of the majors and things like that we teach in colleges. Again,
Yes.
so over.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. The key there is if you have Python code and you run it through AI, it can immediately help you identify the problem and I guess how to fix it. So you're getting like real-time feedback right there from what's happening.
Julian, I think Mark also wants to talk. Mark, you were on mute.
So,
Go for it,
sorry,
Mark.
I had to talk to my wife. Sorry. So my question is what is the purpose of learning? In other words, you're talking about the future of learning, to what end? So maybe we don't even need learning for the new ends that we have once we have AI. Is learning the right thing to focus our AI on? And tool belt is a very 19th century metaphor. So that's something that we, how do we think about things in a new age where humans have very different capabilities? And do we have to think about having a separate learning category as we did in the past?
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. I mean, yeah. What do you think? Do we even need learning? Is this not the right place to be focusing our energy?
I focus on accomplishment. I'm happy to have a conversation offline with you about this. I'd like to, in fact. I think that learning is a means, it's not an end. And so therefore you just have to say, okay, it's a means, but what is the end? And the end needs to be making the world better somehow.
Yes. Okay. Interesting thoughts. I have some thoughts on that, but do you want to chime in, Lynn?
Yeah, so, okay, I realize we don't need to spend a lot of time learning things like in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. But how can you take, say, the kids today and teach them the construct that, well, in the late 15th century, the Christian-Muslim competition in the Western Mediterranean had closed off the land trade routes to the east, which forced the countries in the Atlantic to look to, the trade routes to the east headed west, headed out over the ocean. And again, I don't know how you instill that sort of a synoptic view of things happening without going through the eaches to understand how things developed. And I'd be really interested in thoughts on how that kind of, what do you call it, learning or something else could be pursued. Over.
Well, I don't want to. I really want to hear what Julian has to say. I have a lot of thoughts on that, which is mostly that you only need to know that stuff if you have some purpose for knowing it, or you're an academic and just like to know things in general. But the focus ought to be on why you need to know that, who needs to know what. Nobody will ever know everything, and so it's always a choice, and that choice has to be in service of something, in my view.
Yeah. Yeah, Ben, you want to chime in? I have some thoughts, but I'll save them for later.
Yeah, a couple of quick comments. I think it was Einstein said that education is what happens when the learning stops. I think the notion of achievement that Mark focuses on relates to the notion of personal development. As a faculty member at a university right now, and having taught classes on Python and JavaScript for undergraduates, the focus there, as Steve Jobs says, you learn to code to learn to think. And it's about critical thinking. And this is the mechanisms here, Julian, are about that assistance in critical thinking and the development of critical thinking abilities and capabilities. And so that's how sort of I look on it. And therefore it impacts the process of what we call teaching, and the process of what the individual development of the student is, and achieving and developing their critical skills.
Yeah, great point. I really see as the holy the trinity here of three core things are learning, thinking, and doing, right? Learning is the sort of consumption. How do you like learning and engage better with what you're consuming? The thinking is the operating system on top of what you're learning, whether it be like a content consumption or an experience you had, and how you process that with thinking through reflection and get more deep and introspective. And then the doing is how you actually take the feedback of your learning, of your thinking, and actually act on it and close the intention action gap between what you want to do and what you actually do. And then it's kind of like a loop, right? It's not like a straight line. It's kind of like you take action and that kind of produces feedback on its own. Then you think, you kind of learn more and you close the gap. So I think those three things, learning, thinking, doing, are very tied together. And even though I guess like for now, we're mostly with our company focusing on the learning and a little bit of the thinking part, I think all of these three things have to come together in order to create exponential individuals in this exponential age.
And let me just add, because this is the AI session, all of those are being impacted by our new machine capabilities, learning, thinking, and doing. Generative AI, ChatGPT, is just another way of thinking. It's algorithmic thinking. And so the bigger conversation that I'd love to have with you, Julian, is how are all of these things, what's the future of learning, what's the future of thinking, what's the future of doing, how are all of those things being impacted by these new AI capabilities that are becoming parts of humans?
Great. Yeah, that's a great point of discussion. And I think I'll touch a lot on the learning and a bit on the doing part, and then the thinking part, and then the doing part is something we can explore as well in the later stations of Q&A. But yeah, all really great questions. And the final thing I'd mention here before moving on here, you bring up a good point, Mark. Like, what's the purpose of learning? If I was to answer this question, I'd say it's twofold. I think on one hand, there's the means to the end sort of approach, purpose of learning, which I think is just to be able to solve problems. We learn so that we can acquire some capability that allows us to solve a problem that we have in front of us. So that's the means to the end approach. But I think there's also the purpose of learning that is an end in itself. And this is the curiosity approach of like, I just love learning. I love growing. It doesn't matter whether this is valuable or solves a problem. It just enriches me and fulfills me and helps me find meaning in life. And I think that's very valuable as well. And potentially it is the only thing that will remain if AI takes all of our jobs and there's no work in the future. If we get to that point, well, then learning still has a purpose, at least in being able to instill your curiosity and joy and growth and fulfillment in life. So I think it's twofold from that perspective. All right, can move on. Great discussions here. Thanks for your comments. So, in talking to a lot of students who obviously are at the core of learning for a product, what we're building with Dolly, which I'll talk about more later on. One of the most interesting things we've learned is that the most common study methods are actually the most ineffective ones. And this is true not just for students, but most people that end up learning that. One of the most common ways that they learn turns out to be one of the most ineffective ones that they learn. And the really interesting thing here when we talk about the future of learning is not just the technology component of AI and how AI can help us become better learners, but it's also the learning science component of how do we actually learn effectively? What goes into the science of how we actually process information and encode it from our short-term to our long-term memory, and what strategies and techniques actually lead to the most effective ways of doing it. And it turns out that when we talk to most students and we ask them how they prepare, most of them are just engaging in passive forms of learning. They either take notes verbatim, which is offloading the cognitive load in their minds that's necessary to be able to learn, or they reread their notes, which is just passive consumption, not very effective, or they look through slides and glance over them. And the thing is, the more you reread, the more you're developing what's called the illusion of competence. You believe you think you know what's happening, but in reality you don't, because you're not actually being tested or quizzed or being prompted to think critically about what you actually know. So big question here in the future of learning is not only how can we use AI and these other exponential technologies to impact learning, but how can we bring the science and incorporate it and use AI as a way to bring this learning science to the forefront. That's a big framing here, I think, in the future of learning. But three big things to touch on here as that I think will transform learning. Obviously, I'll focus mostly on AI and very relatedly machine learning. But very important, if we're talking about the future of learning, thinking a little ahead, is virtual reality. A lot of research has been done into how VR experiences already show to produce faster training, more confidence in people's skills, being more emotionally connected to what they're learning, increasing focus. And if you think about the ideal experience or your most rich learning experiences, it's not from reading a piece of content, it's from living an actual experience. That's often how you grow and learn the most. So how can you simulate that? How can you bring that? And I think a very fascinating intersection is perhaps how virtual reality can be combined with AI and machine learning in order to create not only fully immersive experience, but fully immersive, personalized, and dynamic learning experiences. I think in many sense that highlights on the future, right? It's a classic example of, instead of reading about the pyramids of Giza, you're able to have a fully immersive experience of the pyramids, and you have one of the pharaohs as your tour guide that you can ask any question along the process. That's a little bit of the future of virtual reality. Then machine learning, the key thing here about machine learning is just taking data, processing it. In more technical terms, it's about taking large language models and fine tuning them to a large degree so that the machine per se is learning. And the core thing that this really enables, it enables a lot of things, but the core thing is personalized learning. We've heard a lot of this vision of like, oh, learning will be personalized. Now it's actually becoming possible in many real domains. And one very simple example of this is, if you're learning something and you don't understand this idea or concept that's being communicated, imagine if we could leverage data on what you already know, what interests you have, right? Like, oh, I like soccer, I like music, and maybe what your preferred learning styles are, like, oh, I prefer videos or visual, and use all those things we know in order to create a personalized analogy or to create a video, AI generated video on the fly, specifically crafted and curtailed to you. It's a lot of the potential we're able to have here with machine learning. And the last big one here is, of course, AI. And I think a big question for each of these is like, what is the unique superpowers of this technology of AI? What is AI really good at that we could leverage here? And I think one of AI's greatest superpowers is able to identify disparate pieces of knowledge, right? Like just analyze a ton of knowledge in a short period of time and identify relationships, right? Like, hey, this thing's related to this thing. And it was like in completely different knowledge categories, but it found the relationship that's actually relevant. I think that's a huge superpower because it very closely simulates the way that the mind works and how we learn. When we're learning, what are we doing? In general, we're taking an idea, the idea that we're trying to understand, and we're trying to connect it with the things we already know. And many times when something doesn't make sense to us, it's because we can't find a way to connect it with what we already know. And many times when we do find something that makes sense to it, it's because we maybe found a way to relate it to what we already know, right? So AI can do that really effectively and can help us highlight, identify these relationships so we can link our thinking and connect the dots. Super important. Other things worth mentioning here is AI is really good at creating narratives. If we can perhaps further engage the way that we learn in a way that is rich or through this powerful story, one of the best ways we learn as humans is through stories. So what if we could use AI to generate stories that are also personalized to our interests? That's a huge capability as well. So, and the last thing I'll mention is AI is really good at being fast and giving you immediate feedback. if you think about it, there's this interesting difference in learning where if you're reading a textbook or if you're watching a video, in general, that's called non-linear, or sorry, that's called linear learning, because you're like progressively like learning about a concept and kind of going through it. But if you have a conversation with someone else, it's called non-linear learning, because you can ask whatever question, and if that person is really knowledgeable and knows a lot of the answers, you're getting an immediate answer. And so it's non-linear learning because you're immediately identifying your gaps of understanding and closing them right away. And AI has that capability, right? It's the superpower of ChatGPT of being able to ask any question and immediately get an answer, versus going to Google and having to like go and through and search and read an article to find the specific answer you're looking for. That's a really powerful component, and it enables these sort of things like AI tutors, AI assistants, and things like that. All right, so that's a little bit of the overview of the future of learning. I'll connect it next with how we're specifically thinking about this at my company Wisdolia and how it connects. But I'll take a little mini pause there. If anyone wants to share immediate thoughts, maybe add on to anything that I've shared so far on VR, machine learning, and AI. Any immediate thoughts we have here? If not, I can dive into specifically how we're thinking about this at Wisdolia. Yeah, go for it, Lynn. And you're currently muted.
So how do we, I guess, check and balances or error correction or something? Yeah, it's Vint. I was on a call with Vint the other day, who said he asked ChatGPT to write his obituary, and basically it was he said it was amazing how many things that he had never done were attributed to him, and how many things he had done were attributed to somebody else. And we've also heard the stories about the legal brief that contained references that didn't exist, and so on and so forth. So how do we get better at that as time goes on, to the point where you really can have confidence in these all integrated, which I think is fabulous. It just kind of gets to my question about the age of exploration. You can ask the AI to, put together a narrative as to why these kind of things happened. But I'm just wondering about the error correction.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I mean, the fact that, as they call it, the AIs hallucinate is one of the biggest challenges and problems with AI right now, right? And it's this constant war of like finding what the actual truth is versus what's hallucinated. I think, one, it's a very technical problem. So of course, that's trying to be improved from a technical front. But there's things you can do to mitigate it now. I actually had a very interesting experience where I was messing around with ChatGPT and I asked it to answer the question to something like, hey, what are the chapters of this sort of book? And it gave me the chapters to the book, and I knew they were wrong. Like, those are not the chapters. And then I asked it the same question, but then I told it like, hey, if you don't know, just say I don't know. And then it just responded, I don't know. So it's like, by default, it's going to probably hallucinate with an answer. But if you maybe prompt it to give it permission to say, I don't know, then it probably will. So that was an interesting discovery, and the sort of prompt engineering you can do to get better validation. But apart from that,
prompt it. I'm sorry to interrupt. You can also prompt it to just say, please fact check everything you tell me. And if it's, if you give me a source, and if that's what Vint could have said, and you say, okay, where's your source for this? It can do that too. It's our fault for not giving it the right prompts that it hallucinates.
I mean, Vint wasn't necessarily saying, it was just making the observation that left to its own devices to produce this. He wasn't going through and saying how he could have produced the perfect obituary. He was just commenting that left to its own devices.
Right, but and I'm not going to go on with this, but the point that we've learned, I think, about these things is that if you don't give it the right prompts, you're not going to get the right answers. That's the way people work. They won't tell you the truth unless you force them to tell you the truth, and even then they might not. So that I don't know why we expect machines to be any different.
Is that guardrails, Mark?
It's guardrails if you want them, but I don't think,
I'm just kidding.
I don't think they work, but yes, thank you. My ass.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. I think it's partially on us. I don't know if I'd put the full blame on ourselves. We do have to be independent, critical thinkers, and always be a critic and judge of the truth and seek to fulfill it. But I think these tools can do more to help us think, right? Like, hey, like here's a counterpoint, or here's like the source, and give you the source automatically, so you can easily, like in a low friction way, validate the truth for yourself. So there's more that the tools can do, but it comes from both angles.
Also, I think Mei Lin and Dan have their hands up.
Yeah, go for it, Malin.
Hey, Julian. I was really concerned earlier on when you said, oh, of course AI is going to take all of the jobs. I mean, I that is kind of very weird to me, because this current discussion is about how, in fact, humans are interacting with AI so that we can get better answers. The answers are not for the AI, the answers are for the humans. If we as humans don't provide feedback, but are just told AI is going to take all the jobs, there's no jobs for humans, there's no feedback needed, somehow AI is going to run the world for the AIs without any input from humans, I have to really challenge you on this point of view. And then the other thing is, so much of AI has been trained on completely biased information. The voices of women are not there. So that, in fact, if we go into an AI generated world, this is all trained on the fact that there's hardly any female voices. We have no information very little information about the informal economy. I apologize for sounding so forceful, but I'm really, really concerned that somebody as a thought leader like you is saying these kinds of things. And so I challenge you peer to peer on this.
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing both of those points up. So firstly, many people, well, one, I don't think with absolute certainty that there will be no jobs in the future, but I think it's something that has a fair probability. And if there's a fair probability of something, I don't think, I think it's important for us to at least be aware that that might be a possibility, and how we can best prepare for that sort of future if that is to come. I don't want to be like, I'm not a pessimistic person, and I don't want to, like, I guess, induce all this fear, but rather like, hey, like this is a possibility. I don't like the principle of operate by blissful ignorance, because then when things do hit you, they come at a surprise and you're unprepared. I say these things mostly so that we're prepared for the future and what's to come. And a lot of what we're doing with my company is to help people learn faster and adapt quicker to change so that they're better prepared. It's a huge topic on whether there will not be jobs in the future or not. Of course, there's people that disagree here, but I'll give you a specific data point. The World Economic Forum just, I think 2-3 months ago, released a report on the future of jobs. And they predict that within 5 years, a quarter of jobs of today will not exist. Of course, there will be new jobs that will be created, and historically, this has always been the case. But I think they reported that within 5 years, there will be, out of the jobs they analyzed, I think it was like 700 million jobs, 8 million of them will be lost, and 83 million of them will be lost, and 68 million new ones will be created, which basically means that we're seeing for the first time in history that we're getting to this sort of turning point where maybe a number of new jobs that are being created is less than the number of jobs being replaced. Maybe that doesn't end up being the case. Maybe we end up finding a way for new jobs to be created, right? There's no certainty here, but we have to acknowledge that it's a possibility, and that we could get to the turning point where more jobs are displaced than the new ones that are created. If that happens, there's obviously going to be a lot of disbalance, and we have to be able to think about from now, not when it happens, but premeditate on what should we do, what can we do, how can we best prepare if this is to happen. So I don't like preaching pessimism, but I want to be realistic in how disruptive this exponential change is and what we can do about it. Now, to your second point, real quick, on the bias of AI, this is another huge problem. I agree with you. Unfortunately, the data that an AI is trained on largely influences, what it does, how it behaves, what values it adopts. And a very simple way to think about this with is, let's take a superhero like Superman. Superman's amazing, saves a lot of people, and it does a lot of good for humanity. But what if Superman was to have been raised from like parents that taught him, inscribed in him like terrible values, like the world is an awful place, and he became pessimistic? It basically, Superman would have had the same powers, but he would have had different values, and those difference in values might have made him a villain instead of a superhero. So we have to be very, very, very mindful, especially the people crafting and feeding and training these AIs, that, and honestly, it's everyone. It's not just the people with the AIs, but the people that train the AIs use data on all of humanity, right? So we have to be very mindful that whatever we put out in the internet is data that any AI can use to train and understand how we work and adopt values based on that. So it's a huge problem, but that's how I think about it. It's on us to kind of be thoughtful enough to not ingest AI with data that might bias it or lead it to have incorrect values. All right, yeah, fun discussions.
Julian, we
Mr.
have
Lim,
missed.
yeah, go for it.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, our company has a database access language that we've been working on for a lot of years, and we just integrated ChatGPT 3.5 Turbo into it. And so when you're doing processing of data, you kind of want the same results to happen when you give the same input, right? Constant input, constant result. And we immediately found that was not the case at all. We were getting kind of like your hallucination thing. So what I did is I went into ChatGPT and explained my problem. I literally said, I've got this situation. I'm not getting the same answers consistently. What's the issue with this? And it then had a bunch of parameter changes for us to make. There's a thing called temperature, which by default says be creative. And there's a thing called top P, which says be creative. And those are its defaults. And then of course you have the system message prompt, prefixing that you need to do. And so it told me all of those things, which we then integrated into our programming language, and got much better results, where I would say about 90% of the time we got the same outputs for a given set of input. So it's kind of interesting. I don't know how the online one works, but I was very surprised that the default settings were don't be accurate, but be creative in terms of the results. So I think that might also be causing problems for people.
Yes. Yeah. Actually, on our product as well, we have a temperature of 0 just to have consistency in results. I don't know if being more creative necessarily entails more hallucination. Maybe it does. But yeah, it's something to be aware of. And I think obviously sometimes being more creative helps if the goal is to create a story or something like that. So yeah, you just need to know what your use case is and how much creativity you want to amp up the AI to have.
And did you change the top P as well?
I kept it the same, but it still generated similar results. Like it was fairly consistent, so I didn't find the need to have to modify the top P as well.
Sure. Okay. Good to know. Thanks.
Absolutely. All right, cool. We'll can dive more into a lot of these discussions later on, but as a final quick segment here, I'll tell you a little bit of how we're thinking about what I've just talked about in the context of a product in our company, Wisdolia. So firstly, the way I would frame it is one of the most complex organisms in the universe is the human brain. Yet it did not come with an instruction manual, right? Pretty crazy. And in school, we were told to learn a lot of things, but we were never really taught how to learn effectively, right? Maybe the last time we learned something about how to learn was perhaps how to read in first grade, or how to take notes sometimes if our teachers ever taught us that, but we were never really taught how to learn effectively. And now what happens is we find ourselves in this exponential age where the amount of information is increasing exponentially. We're drowning in information, yet we still have this sort of caveman brain. And overall, we kind of suck at processing the information we take in. Even just like studies show that 1 week after reading something in a passive form, we only remember about 10% of the details. So memory naturally is not great, but the core thing here and what we're really focused on is learning science has shown that active learning techniques are really effective. Things like, for example, active recall through flashcards, or being able to deconstruct a concept to its component parts. I create a mind map and identify relationships. These higher order levels of thinking are really what are at the core. And I'll show one slide before giving a little demo, but there's this core. This is one of my favorite like learning science frameworks. It's simple to understand, but basically, this will be contextualized. We do AI generated flashcards, take any piece of content, turn it into flashcards. And the next big thing we're doing is smart cards, which I'll talk a little bit more about. But what you're looking at here is Bloom's taxonomy. And in the learning science world, this taxonomy talks about 6 different cognitive processes that happen when you engage in learning, right? And at the very base of the pyramid here is remembering, right? It's memory. Things, for example, such as what is the capital of France? But of course, these are very basic, right? Most of the time, you don't need to remember these rote memorization facts. As we go up the pyramid, what happens is we go from lower order thinking to higher order thinking. And the idea is the higher order thinking you engage in, the more effective the learning will be. So this goes from remember to understand, explain how something like supply and demand works, apply it, like take a formula and solve a practice problem using that math formula. Now you're applying the knowledge in a different context. Analyze is break it down and analyze what its relationship between different parts are. Evaluate is evaluate like the effectiveness of something like a marketing plan. What are the pros, the cons? When should you use this? When should you not? And then finally, at the highest level, it's creation, right? Create a piece of code, create an experiment, create a new idea based on what you know. And so the goal for us really is how can we engage students and learners overall in these higher order levels of thinking. So I'll end here by just giving a very quick little demo on how this works. So we create AI generated flashcards, and let me actually pull this up. And this works for any YouTube video, article, or PDF. So this was a talk that you guys had a few months ago from Jerry. So I could pull this up and open the extension here. It's a Chrome extension. And when I open this, I've already generated cards, but this is what I would see. I'm able to select the minute range of what I want. So say I want minute 5 to 15. And by the way, there's free and paid version. The free version is limited up to 12 minutes, but on paid, I can choose whatever range. Here, I can also choose how many cards I want. And when I hit generate, it's gonna get the video, get the text from the video, the transcript, and start to analyze it, determine the most important parts, and then generate a set of questions and answers through these flashcards that can help me prompt and turn this passive consumption experience of watching a video or reading something and turn it into these critical thinking questions that help me think deeper. Right? So what's the main theme discussed in this text, right? It's about the future of work and the role of automation. Explain this concept of fully automated luxury communism, analyze the potential outcomes of automation in the future of work, right? So, and by the way, these are all categorized based on, this is an analyze type question in the pyramid I showed you. This is an evaluate type question, evaluate the impact of automation on traditional economic assumptions of capitalism. And then this is like a creation type question, right? If you were to join a council to discuss the future of mobile computing, what topics or issues would you prioritize, right? This is a very high order level thinking question. And what you can do here is if you like this, you can go ahead and save it. You can choose what category or deck you want to save it to. And then you can go ahead and like view your saved cards and just go ahead and review them. And this is very, very simple right now, but that's an overview of how it works. Of course, this works for text as well. So this is an article. Meta recently announced an open source model of a large language model, Llama 2. So again, I can go ahead and choose here, generate the cards. This will take the text and again, generate a set of questions. And then now I can actively engage and think about what are the main questions here, right? Like what is the potential of generative AI in terms of economic and social opportunities? Or why, big question here is why open source one of these large language models? What's the benefit to everyone? So anyways, you get the idea. Last thing I'll show you here is how we're moving to smart cards. Now, smart cards, the basic idea here is it's the same sort of idea, and this we're going to launch in a few days. It's almost done, but this is a little prototype. You generate the questions, but now the biggest difference is instead of just being able to see the answer, which you can still get if you say, I don't know, now you're able to write out the answer it, and the AI will immediately evaluate it and give you feedback on what you got right, what you got wrong, and what you left out. And the key idea here is that it helps you identify your understanding gap. And from this understanding gap, now the question is, how do you close it? So this is V1 of smart cards. V2, version 2 of smart cards will basically be about closing the understanding gap. And this will be like, you'll have actions here like ask a follow-up question to the AI, or give me a personalized analogy that explains this in a way I'm likely to understand, or give me recommendations on videos to help close this gap, or let me engage in a debate with the AI, or let me teach it to an AI, or let me create a mind map, and things like that. So there's a lot of interesting opportunities that we can have moving forward into the future. But yeah, that's basically the overview and how we're thinking about it at this point. Oh, one last thing I'll mention. We talked about how this is not just about learning, but also about thinking. And a huge component of thinking is what's called your personal knowledge management system, right? It's basically the system that you use to be able to save information you find valuable, organize it intelligently, like by category, idea, content medium type, etc., and then be able to resurface the right ideas, the right questions, the right insights at the right moments. And AI, and so the very simple version we have of that is being able to save a question and revisit it later. But of course, we can get much more powerful knowledge organization mechanisms, especially assisted with AI. So yeah, that's the overview here, and that's kind of a little bit about what we're building. So appreciate the time. Oh, wrong one.
Just a couple quick questions.
Yeah, I'll just end on this one. Yeah, we can go into Q&A now.
When you went to Llama 2, how did that change from GPT 3.5 Turbo?
So we're not using Llama 2 yet. It just got released a couple days ago. But it's an interesting discussion of OpenAI, where we're currently using OpenAI in their API. But OpenAI is not open source, right? They only allow you to use the technology through an API. So you can't see the code. You can't see how it works. You can't modify the code. You just give them an input. They give you an output. But now with Llama 2, you have the whole code base. You can modify it. You can change it. You can improve it. You can train it and fine tune it on your own data. And that's one of the next things we're going to do in the next month or two. We're going to take Llama 2. We're going to fine tune it with our data. Like to date, we've had over 2 million cards be generated, and 300,000 of those have been saved by learners. And that's super valuable data that we can feed to a model, fine tune it so that it generates even better quality questions and also personalizes the experience to each individual.
Thank you.
So yeah, excited to explore more of that soon. Go for it, Mark.
Okay. So here's what's interesting to me. This is very nice at doing what education has been designed to do, which is put things into people's heads, and it seems to work. It can, in lots of ways. But what you're saying is machines can go all the way up that hierarchy, the Bloom's taxonomy, and do the work. And so that's someplace where people are not necessarily having an advantage. My view is the place where people have an advantage is bringing things out. is creating things that we haven't seen before. And we're not very good at that, because once you do all these things, suppose you make 1 billion cards and then you recurse, that becomes part of the recursive training of the AI. What's the point for humans? That all these things are done, they're answered, they're found out. Why do I have to put them into my head when it's there in my pocket? So why do we need to put this stuff into heads? Why are we not focusing more on saying, are there unique things that being human we can bring out into the world? And that's my response in a sense to Mei Lin, which is that it's the only things that our wetware humans are going to be valuable for, or those parts of us humans that are wetware, are what we can produce in the world and not what we can take in. Don't you?
Yes.
Do you agree? This is for you, Julian, and for Mei Lin and everybody. I think it's a really important discussion.
Yeah, great question, great point. I'm going to stop sharing here to be full screen mode. I have 2 thoughts on this. The first is that we basically have to be able to, again, like, what's the purpose of learning? The purpose of learning is not so that we just get like an answer and cool, now I know this thing. It's how you use that knowledge to solve a problem, right? So sure, you could go ask the AI and it probably knows the answer. And so if you know the answer, why does it matter if the AI also knows the answer? Well, what matters is how you're able to use that piece of knowledge differently than an AI might, right? To go, etc., be able to solve a problem. So that still ends up being the purpose and goal. That's one
Why
direction
the
here.
curiosity part, your second part of just learning for its own sake, is really not that.
Oh, sorry, go for it. Yeah, I thought you were going to say something else.
So that's why, for me, the curiosity part, where you said there are 2 reasons. One is to accomplish things. I agree with that. The second is just because it feels good. It's nice curiosity. It's the curiosity, what you call the curiosity factor. I don't see the value in the curiosity factor. Some people have it, some people don't have it. Hey, you know what? Well, so what that you like learning?
Are
Most
you
people
here
don't.
because you're trying to learn something that will help you in your job, or because you're curious and you enjoy the discussion and what you're learning?
No, I'm learning to see if you can add something to what how I contribute to the world. I'm not interested, and this is me. This is very much a perspective that I have, and forgive me for going on about it. But I think that most people in the world, academics accepted, don't love learning. They don't enjoy learning. They find learning hard and a pain in the ass, but they do it very willingly when they want to accomplish something. And that is really, so I agree with you in your last point, that's really the focus of why we're doing this stuff. And the question is, can humans accomplish anything uniquely that machines can't do? Or is it that new human combination, human machine symbiosis, that really is accomplishing everything in the world going forward?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and to that point, the second thing I was going to mention is there's 2 types of questions at a very high level. There's questions that have a right answer, right? Like, this is just the way it is. And there's questions that are perspective based. There's no right answer. So if you ask an AI, like, hey, is AI good or bad? It'll give you an answer and it'll give you some perspectives, but it can't give you the right answer. So the job for humans is to consider maybe the perspective of the AI, but you also have to consider other perspectives, your perspectives, the perspectives of other individuals that bring up points that maybe the AI does not bring up or consider. So that's also an opportunity where AI has the opportunity to at least guide our thinking or help us consider things we may have not considered. But the most valuable thing any of us bring is our perspective. That's the most unique things to us. Everything we think or believe is a subset of everything we've experienced. AI is different in that it's just a huge knowledge base of everyone's like knowledge compiled into one, and it somehow translates that into a single perspective. But that's just one perspective. You have to be able to bring in many different perspectives for the critical questions that don't have a right answer.
Yes, I agree that humans are uniquely good at framing, and that that is that's an important feature. So maybe we should focus on framing, which I do.
Yes,
I'll
100%.
jump in. I'll
Go
jump
for it,
in.
man.
Uh,
Yes.
I really am a little concerned, and so I'm just gonna speak. This whole idea of sounding so definitive about the smart cards and the answers is really kind of putting human thinking in a kind of box, which is the sum of our current thinking today. But people who know me know that I talk about growing up in Singapore. In 1965, when Singapore became independent, nobody thought little brown people in Southeast Asia could drive an economic miracle. And yet the ability for the Singaporeans to do something, which in fact was a different way of doing economic growth, led to China bringing 800 million people out of poverty. But what I am seriously concerned about is the digital colonialism that is sort of implied in your current perspective, which is, oh, there are answers and here they are. And I'm going to help everybody in the world learn my view of the world. It reminds me of glockenspiel. So clockwork mechanism in 1700s or 1600s. People were so impressed that mechanical things could play the violin and play the piano, but then they only could do the reproduction of what was already. In fact, then the invention of musical notation allowed music to spread and people to be able to play later. And it wasn't just whatever could be improvised in the moment. I worry seriously that Wisdolia is bringing a view of the world, which is the pouring concrete into the current state of knowledge. And there we sit.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, it's a good concern. I mean, one thing to note is we're 5 months old. This is our starting point. This is not by any means like the whole vision and scope of what we're creating. A very simple starting point is just help people find answers and test their understanding of things. But something very core to what we want to do is inspire and instill greater curiosity and creativity in the thinking that we're able to do. One, we're starting off here with smart cards and just getting them to think more critically, but this is of course still based on concrete answers, basically. And by the way these answers are generated is the answers are basically deemed like what you got right, what you got wrong, what you left out is just completely in the context of what is in the text that they put. So it's not like we're saying like, oh, this is what we think or what the AI thinks is the right answer. No, it's just comparing and contrasting what the content is. If the author has a certain opinion or says something wrong, then unfortunately the evaluation is also going to be incorrect. And that's a limitation we'll aim to solve further into the future, but it's completely based on the piece of context that the question was generated from and therefore what the answer is likely to be. But I agree, this is very rudimentary. This is very like cutthroat of like what the answer is and just going off a piece of text. A big question for us is how can we instill greater curiosity and open creative thinking in these individuals? So that's I have a lot of thoughts on that. I won't go super deep, but just want to pinpoint that it is more of a starting point rather than the cutthroat direction that we're going on for the long term.
So I'm following up because I helped to invent CRM, customer relationship management. And I'm in public record as saying, I saw my baby become a serial killer. What really happened was that technology produced reports that could be used to manipulate other people. And, CEOs went wild, right? And they got that 7,000 employees to do illegal things because the report said, okay, you got to do this. And I just want to make sure that you understand the unforeseen consequences and take that into account. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think are those consequences or sort of things we should be watching out for in your mind, like the top 1 to 3 ones?
I think self-reflection about what is going on. I think actually getting diverse feedback, particularly from Indigenous people, from women, from grandmothers who don't can't read or write, from blind people, from all kinds of diverse perspectives, because it's very, very easy to feel good when you surround yourself with people who just say, whoa, good stuff, high five. You want to stay there. You don't want to go to indigenous people who say to you, and I don't know your background, but this way of looking at the world doesn't make sense to us.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like diversity matters the most when there's these open-ended questions that don't have right answers. And yeah, I think part of what we plan to do, let's say the question you get is AI good or bad? Well, now you could have the AI say like, hey, give a perspective from like a woman in like this different field, or give a perspective, right? You can basically tell the AI to simulate the perspective of these
And that's the
different individuals.
problem, because those perspectives of the women aren't there. If you talk to a Black woman, when the AI is asked to generate an image that looks like her, I just spoke to somebody, out of 100 images, only 5 looked like her because the AI was trained on white women.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a huge problem, and there needs to be more diversity in the data sets that we feed. 2, that may just be for generative AI. I think like OpenAI's large language models are massive. Like they have billions and billions of parameters. So I think obviously they have those perspectives, and any perspective you can give it. The question is, how good are those perspectives, say from a Black woman compared to a white male, right? Maybe it can give you both those perspectives, but probably still has more data on the white male, and maybe the perspective is more accurate, but it's not to say that it can't give a good perspective from a Black woman. Yeah, it mainly depends on the size of the training data, and that's why these bigger large language models tend to be better in giving diverse perspectives, because they have more data on which they can give those perspectives from. But I agree, it's a good point, and I appreciate you highlighting that. That's something we need to be super aware of. So thanks for bringing that up.
Well, thank you, Julian. Before going to Bruce, just I want to let you know that we are already on top of the hour, so we are just running with the extra time. So whoever who wants to or needs to run out, we'll just continue for some minutes while we finish the rest of the questions and the conversations with Julian. Okay, so Bruce, you can continue.
Yeah, when I listen to what's being said here, it seems to me that, Mark, you were saying how, you have all this information that is fundamentally exterior to us, but nonetheless available to us. I kind of look at that, at those data points, those questions, those answers, as being like an artist palette. And it's going to give us the opportunity to mix and match in ways that people haven't thought about. And I think that it creates pattern recognitions. We begin to see patterns that we never could have seen before. And then having that data immediately available to us in ways that we hadn't thought of gives us an entree to ways to create solutions to problems that we hadn't seen. That's the way I'm seeing it. I don't know it's right, but that's my thought.
Possibly.
Yeah.
And that traditionally has been the role of the very good professor. You become a PhD by reading everything that you could possibly read, and then you synthesize and you try to come up with, for your students, some syntheses that might be helpful. That has been a role. Yes, it's an important role.
But Mark, the thing is, as a professor, you're distilling the information that you have, which is very valuable, but you may be distilling it in a way that all of the students in your class don't see it that way. And so when you have a different palette, you can see things that were not visible before.
Absolutely. I don't disagree with you at all. I think we agree.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah, just a quick comment there. I do think like basically these AIs, large language models, have so much data. It is a huge value point to be able to figure out how you can play from that palette of data to create new ideas, or again, what I highlighted before, help you identify relationships between things that maybe other people might not have noticed. All right. Harry, you want to
Harry?
go for it?
Hey, Julie,
Hey,
can you hear me?
yes.
Hey, excellent presentation. I work at the National Defense University. Not speaking official professor, have been for 6 years, and I love this presentation. What I have to say is, it seems that one of the opportunities here is to different type of collaborative model where you're getting input from different students. Obviously, this would be an AI that's tuned in a more limited sense. And so when you're not talking about scale of GPT-4, for example, and you're going more into perhaps, something that's limited, obviously, but I'd be really curious about what you think about the potential for collaborative design of a sort of, let me say, socio-cyber-physical system that is a learning environment. At the National Defense University, by the way, you would be a fantastic speaker because we're looking at how do we engage students. And I love that my heart sang when you mentioned Bloom's taxonomy. So the question would be, how could you, or would you consider exploring, putting in a more secure cloud, privacy respects privacy, but allows students to contribute to a general sense of like, here's a corpus, here's something we're trying to understand. Let's say, for example, protecting critical infrastructure. So that's question one. On the more technical side, absolutely thinking about Numenta. So that's Jeff Hawkins' organization. He has a new book, 1,000 Brains. If you have not looked at that, if you have not reached out to Jeff Hawkins and his team at Numenta, you absolutely should. The other thing that comes to mind is considering the limits of hallucination, and Jeffrey Hinton last year. So Hinton 2022 has a piece on forward algorithms. I think is really important to consider. Another thing is, if you are still including back propagation, T-sale, something in liquid AI, if you're talking about that or thinking about that also on architecture. So those are two technical points. On the issue of labor, Benedict Frey has the technology trap. And so the concern about jobs, those issues, he put out a piece a couple years ago. But the longer answer for concerns about jobs and AI, you're probably aware of that. But I would just be curious first, how could you create putting together or tuning through the workflow in a privacy way? Have you considered that for thanks.
Gotcha. Okay, you cut out like some parts there, so it's hard to get the full question. But I think it's like kind of being able to apply this or implement this into secure cloud infrastructure for the students that you guys have. Is that kind of the core question?
Yeah, it's part of it, but also creating something, tuning an AI, the experience. So in other words, collectively, take a classroom and you're trying to build something. So I love the interaction, but in a way that each one of the students is contributing to an AI that would understand a particular problem.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, firstly, I guess happy to have a follow-up conversation and learn more about like what you guys are doing and see like what the potential for collaboration there could look like. So I'll leave my contact information here in the chat. Feel free to reach out for any of you as well. And yeah, for a specific instance of classroom fine-tuning a model. So the way this kind of works at a high level is there's the global fine-tuning, and then there's like the local personalized individual fine-tuning. The global fine-tuning is, hey, out of all the data we've gathered
Judy,
from people
I turned off
and
my
how they
mute
learn.
so you can make noise.
Apparently not.
Oh.
Your mute's off.
Yeah, now you're actually on mute. That's funny. But yeah, so there's the global fine tuning, right? Take all the like say questions people have generated, the ones they saved, and then that goes into the model to fine tune it. Then there's a personalized component, and the personalized component basically works by say in a classroom, what are the students learning? How are they engaged? Whenever they engage with the specific type of material or learning style, there's quantitative measures you'd probably want to be looking at, right? Like what when they understood something, what helped them understand that thing, or what sort of explanation or analogy kind of helped the best, right? It's you kind of like want to get minute data on what's leading to these breakthroughs in understanding, and then like train the model basically on the things that help the most, right? So it was like, so for example, let's say I didn't understand something, and then I was recommended a video and I immediately understood it. Okay, cool. This person's maybe more of a visual learner. They like this sort of explanation that was given in the video itself. Okay, cool. So those are just the at a high level, the data points you want to be collecting. And the last thing I'll mention here is that what we really aim to create here is a data flywheel where it's a continuous improvement cycle. So it goes all the way from the AI generating a question. Cool, you go through that, you look at it, it's like, oh, it's not a good question, on to the next one. This one's like, oh, this one's good, let me engage with it. I tell it what I like about it or answer it, and I get a level of understanding, and maybe I even save it. And the saving is, and the interaction with it is the highest signal. Cool, that feeds in the data back to the fine-tune model, and the fine-tune model improves and then immediately deploys the model to live production. And then now the next question that's generated automatically incorporates that positive feedback loop. And now it just operates on its own. So that's basically what we aim to build there.
Hey, Julian, just to wrap, I love that example, data flywheel. When I get a chance to reach to you, wargaming, or just a tabletop exercise, not to put the Marshall spin on it. But if you think about executive level tabletop exercises, I think there's a real opportunity for that data flywheel concept to use your system as a way to prepare senior leaders for a war game. And I think there's an iterative cycle there that could be really interesting on training AI. So thank you very much for what you're doing. Look forward to being in touch. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks so much, Harry. Appreciate it. Looking forward to following up. All right. Yeah. Not sure if there's any other questions, but also wanted to mention little plug here that we're close to closing our pre-seed round of fundraising for a startup. So if you're also curious to explore that, feel free to reach out and can get you in on the round before it closes. But yeah, big vision, early beginnings, and it's been fun.
Okay, yeah, I think we have no more questions. So thank you, Julian, for bringing your points of view, your perspective, and your wisdom and your work here to share with the PCI community. And yeah, to all of you who are present, thank you for participating, for the very nice questions. And yeah, have an amazing Sunday. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you, Julian.
Thanks so much, guys. I appreciate the tough and fun questions. Thanks for the space and time. Feel free to reach out if anything. But great. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. Take care.
Julián, quédate un momento, por favor. Se fue.